On April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. This year is the 50th anniversary of that horrific, tragic event. But as part of our ongoing recognition of Dr. King, we feature interviews with people who knew him, who marched with him, who were side by side, shoulder to shoulder with him. One of those people, Edith Savage-Jennings. I sat down with her and she talked about a relationship with Dr. King, with Coretta Scott King, what kind of man he really was, what kind of leader he was, and why the civil rights movement was changed dramatically because of Dr. King. Edith Savage-Jennings passed in late 2017, but this interview is as important today as ever. Here's that conversation. Hi, I'm Steve Adubato. It is our honor and our pleasure to introduce the young lady you're about to see on camera. She is Edith Savage-Jennings. She is a civil rights icon. Right. Born in?
Jacksonville, Florida.
Came to New Jersey when you were two?
Two.
To Trenton.
Right.
You were extremely close to Dr. Martin Luther King. How close?
Well, I think very, very close. Daddy King and Mama King adopted me into their family in 1966. So I don't think I get any closer than that.
Yeah. Your involvement in the civil rights movement, be specific, because it is so extraordinary.
Well, let me tell you how I got involved. In 1957, Martin had called Reverend S. Howard Woodson, I know you know who Reverend Woodson was.
Absolutely.
And said that he could not raise any money in the South at all for the movement. And did he know someone that could raise some funds? And he says, I have someone I know can raise some funds, and I'll ask her. So he called me. He says, Edith, would you do something for me? I said, depends on what it is. I'm marrying in 1 month. It depends on what it is. He says, well, I have a friend in Atlanta who cannot raise any money for the movement. I said, what movement? Because I hadn't heard of Dr. King at that point. And he says, well, he's starting an organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And they're just strapped. They don't have any money. So I said, just give me a month. He says, no, we can't wait a month. We need to do this in about 2 or 3 weeks. So I said, tell you what I'll do. I'll have a mass rally. But I must have him to be the speaker. And if he's willing to come, then we'll go. And that's how I met Dr. King.
We were talking before we got on the air about a PBS documentary that those of us who are connected to PBS are so proud of. PBS documentary leading up to the March on Washington, which you happened not to be there only because you had a foot injury, as you were telling me.
I just saw it on television.
And I was saying to you, it's considered by many to be the greatest speech of the 20th century, and you said that you've seen him speak in other situations, Dr. King, where he was even greater. I
thought he was greater when he talked about the March on Washington for Poor People's Campaign.
1967.
1967.
Describe it.
Well, what he had said in the private talk to us, that he felt that America needs to get right. Number one, he talked about the wars, and he felt that they needed to come home and take care of their own rather than stay over fighting somebody else's battles all the time, that we needed him at home, the Army, rather, at home, to take care of America. And he just went on to say why we ought to have the Poor People's Campaign. And it was all people, Indians, Hispanic, Italians. We had all kinds of people that were poor and involved.
And interestingly, that speech was never taped. Curious about something. You've been involved in the civil rights movement for many, many years.
Right. Long before when I was a child. I presented Mrs. Roosevelt the flowers when I was 10 years old.
Eleanor Roosevelt?
Yes.
What?
Yes. If you saw the segment, that was me at 10 years old, presenting her the flowers.
In what year?
Well, see, whatever. I'm 90 now. I don't like to say it, but I'm 90. I don't mind.
Well, then go back 80 years, and you were 10 years old, and you were there.
Yeah, I was there.
With Eleanor Roosevelt?
Eleanor Roosevelt. Well, what happened, I like to tell that's not long. When we were on our way down to Bordentown, New Jersey, my mother was driving, and she says, now let me remind you that you're not supposed to say anything when you present the flowers. And I kept saying, I'm not deaf, I'm not dumb. Why can't I say anything? So I did the usual on behalf of the organization. Then I said, Mrs. Roosevelt, I want to thank you for being so nice to colored people. Well, she loved it. We stayed friends up until she passed.
And you also, at the Capitol Theater in
Trenton.
In Trenton, they did not allow blacks. It was segregated.
Yes.
And you did not accept that.
No.
And you did what?
Well, I was a member of the NAACP youth chapter at the time. And so I said to the advisor, what would you like to do? I said, I'd like to integrate the theater, the Capitol Theater. And she said, oh, no way, no way, no way. And I said, well, okay, no way. But then I decided I was going to do it on my own.
On your own?
With my friends. David Dinkins, former mayor of New York.
That's right.
And so we decided.
Who actually had history in Trenton.
In Trenton.
He sure did.
Yeah, so on a Saturday we went and we sat downstairs in the second row.
Wow.
And the usher came and said, you're in the wrong seats. And so David nudged me, he said, you're the spokesman. So I said, no, we're not moving. And we sat there.
Yeah.
And the manager came and said, you're in the wrong seat, you belong in the balcony. And I said, we're not moving. And we didn't move. We stayed through the whole movie. They didn't call the police, which I was a little concerned that we were probably going to jail. And I had said, we're jail close. But we didn't move. And so he didn't come back. He didn't call the police. So we went back the next Saturday and sat in the same seats to make sure.
And you integrated that theater?
I integrated that theater.
And speaking of integrating things, we're going to show a picture of you and Rosa Parks, who sat on that bus and refused to give up her seat. And I'm going to ask you something. Fast forward, if you could. Civil rights movement today, given the events in Ferguson, given the events in Staten Island with the Eric Gardner case, given the events across this country involving, and they're not all the same events, but many of those events involve African American, either very young men, children, or older men, and white police officers. Right. And there are a lot of rallies, protests, civil rights protests. Some call them anti-police protests. What do you see as the biggest difference? Because you have this extraordinary perspective. The biggest difference in the civil rights marches that you experienced and participated in and what you see today?
Well, let me say this. Number one, I think we're missing something. I happen to be a mother of a son that I taught when he was 10, that whenever a police officer says anything to you, you say yes, sir, or no, sir, because they're very irritated because they are the authority. And I taught him that. And I just feel that what's happening, parents are not doing the job of talking to their children about who to respect and so forth. Not that he probably was angry for some other reason than the fact he might have said something to him. I don't know. He didn't have a weapon, so therefore that irritates me. He didn't have one. He could have called for a backup. And I think that would have solved the problem. But I'm saying that police officers, I worked in law enforcement for 34 years. So I'm well aware of how police react to
Are you sensitive to police officers' jobs?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying...
No, are you sensitive to the job that they have?
No, in a way, yes, in a way. I think I had asked that, I went all over asking police chiefs to do the nonviolent training for police officers, which I think is crucial. They need to know. And they never wanted to accept it. They said, no, we can't afford it, or so forth. But the only answer to all of this is that we do have police officers. They sort of, I'm saying, I don't know this to be true, police officers, when they're taking the exam, then when they get to the physical part of the exam, that they put on a show, and they pass. Now, that's another one of the problems, I believe.
Before I let you out here, I want to ask you this question about civil rights leaders. Dr. King was an extraordinary leader. By the way, from your perspective, What was Dr. King, from your perspective, what was Dr. King's greatest leadership quality?
Well, first thing, he was calm. I always felt that he was anointed to do what he did. I called him the 20th century prophet. That's what I called him, because that's the way I felt about him. You know, Steve, I lived with Dr. King and Mrs. King. Personally lived with them. When I go to Atlanta, I stayed in their home. I'm about the only person I know that stayed there. And I just knew them to be who they really were. Loving, kind, parents, loving to each other. And so there was nothing about Dr. King that would ever make me think that he was doing something wrong or that he wasn't right in what he was doing. It's not so much that we were friends, it's because I believe that deep down in my heart, that he was sincere about what he was doing.
Did the civil rights, last question, did the civil rights movement in some ways die in this country when Dr. King was killed in 1968?
Well, you know, I have said this, and I guess I maybe shouldn't say it publicly, but I don't know whether it was that all of the leaders that was working with him were frightened that they may be assassinated too. But I just always felt that if somebody had really taken up the mantle to follow what he was doing, that things would have been better today.
No one really did, in your opinion.
And nobody never took it. We had some leaders, but they never did what I felt they should have done.
Edith Savage-Jennings, it says here you're a civil rights icon. You're more than that. You are an American treasure. And I want to thank you for joining us on public broadcasting.
And I thank you for having me.
Okay. This is One on One. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you so much.
Think this is absurd? Insurance fraud costs every New Jersey family over $1,300 every year. Report fraud at njinsurancefraud.org.
Also brought to you by the New Jersey Office of the Insurance Fraud Prosecutor and by NJ Best, New Jersey's 529 College Savings Plan.